Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Casual Krakoa. I'm Dave Busing, founder and editor-in-chief of comicbookherald.com. Thanks to everybody who is joined live currently. If you are there, let me know in the chat that you can hear me, that the video is functioning. These things, we cannot take these things for granted. Sometimes you talk for a couple minutes and there's no sound coming out. Let's get some talk here in the chat about whether or not I am audible. Until that time, you can watch me in live action here, update the image slideshow for today's episode. We're going to talk about X Lives of Wolverine. We're going to talk about X-Men Dark Reign, what's going on in Dark Reign and how that's impacting the X-Men. We're going to talk today about Marauders number 27, which came out last week and I did not discuss. Actually has a really interesting last page. So I want to make sure we touch on that as well. And, and then what was the other one? Oh, Death of Doctor Strange had a Black Knight X-Men crossover. So we'll talk about that one as well. There we go. All right, yeah, sorry I'm running a little bit late. I just got back from aiding the birth of my father figure, and time gets tricky. Time gets tricky when you're doing such things. But hey, it looks like everything's looking and sounding good. We got some first live chat folks here. Thanks for joining. Really appreciate it. But yeah, let's do this. Let's officially get into it. If you have questions about today's comics, if you just have topics you want to discuss, definitely let me know in the chat. The super chat is open. If you feel like supporting Comic Book Herald, that's the best way to get your thing seen. And I will definitely prioritize all of those. But nonetheless, I will try to go through all the questions that I can see as I'm talking here, and touch on some good, fun topics today. Because we got a ramshackle day of X-Men comics here as we are in the interim. We are in the pause, right, between the end of the Reign of X with Inferno and Jonathan Hickman's final X-Men comics and on into the Destiny of X. The Destiny of X will officially begin, it seems like, very late March, but right now we have the X Lives of Wolverine and X Deaths of Wolverine 10-issue weekly event. I'm seeing it here in the chat, declared the best comic ever. Conversation over. We're done. It's the best. Yeah, no, we got a lot to say. I got a lot to say about X Lives of Wolverine number 1. I'm going to have a full, proper crack in Krakoa. It's actually already, it's probably, maybe even already uploaded. It's going right now. It's going right now on the other machine. But let's do this. All right, so welcome to Casual Krakoa. I'm Dave Busing, founder and editor-in-chief of comicbookherald.com. And today we are going to talk about all the X-Men comics that came out. Let's start with the big one. Let's start with the event comic, which is X Lives, X Deaths of Wolverine. All right, X Lives number 1 came out today. It is a 10-issue weekly comic series, alternating between lives and deaths issues week to week, telling the story of a time-traveling Wolverine protecting someone critical to mankind. Now, if you are here on the live chat, I should mention up front, I am going to spoil the heck out of the comics that came out, okay? Everything we talk about, spoilers are going to be present. I'm not going to try to ruin anything, but we're going to talk about these. We're going to talk about these as if we've read them, which I have. So that's the conversation, all right? So if you're not cool with that, I'll come back later when you've read it, and then you can talk about it. Everybody in the chat, all I ask is that we be respectful of those around you. Have a good, fun time, and let's talk X-Men comics. X Lives Wolverine number 1. I was skeptical. I've been very skeptical, okay, of X Lives and X Deaths, namely because the Percy, X-Force, and Wolverine experience has not been my favorite. It's fine. I like it fine. Those comics are often accompanied by really great art, right? Joshua Cassara's first time out really got into his work on X-Force, doing some amazing stuff. Wolverine, I think Adam Kubert is doing like career best stuff. I love what Adam Kubert's doing on that book, and that maybe that's sacrilege because the Kuberts have such a legacy as an artistic family. But I've really been digging that, So there's some good stuff in there. They're all like extremely, extremely competent workman-like books. They just aren't super exciting to me. And I think what became even more, what was more of a problem as X-Force and Wolverine built and built and built and built is Percy's playing a really long game. And this is something that I've talked about a bunch, but like I think actually most of the X-Men writers that started in the Dawn of X, that started on the Wave 1 titles after House of X and Powers of 10, they have confidence and some comfort in playing extremely long games. Now, a lot of times as comic fans, it sounds very appealing. You know, like that sounds extremely appealing, right? That is one of, if not the thing that Jonathan Hickman became most well known for and most beloved for by Marvel fans was these wheels within wheels long running series. You know, the way that his Secret Warriors builds to Fantastic Four, builds to Avengers, builds to Secret Wars, right? That stuff's extremely exciting. And I love that. I love that in the Marvel Comics universe, you know? So the idea of the long run is extremely exciting. What I am skeptical of is whether or not some of the creatives in the X office can, or more importantly, are pulling it off, right? Whether or not they can is kind of besides the point. I think a lot of the, Benjamin Percy's a really good writer. He's written really good Green Arrow stuff for DC. He's got written good fiction, right? His Wolverine, like I said, his X-Force, they're interesting ideas at times. They are not uninteresting comics. That I would not say for sure, right? But it's not something that has really blown me away. Has not been. Maybe it's just not my cup of tea or something. So with X Lives and X Deaths, the hype machine for X Lives and X Deaths of Wolverine was too high. The volume was turned up too loud in terms of what was possible. And in comparisons to House of X and Powers of 10, because it's a weekly series where no other X-Men comics are coming out. Percy in interviews is saying he's trying to do the best Wolverine comic of all time, which awesome. You should, right? If you're writing Wolverine, you should try to write the best Wolverine comic of all time. But like that's a high bar, right? That's a high bar. For the record, we have on Comic Book Herald right now, if you go to comicbookherald.com, we have the X best Wolverine comics of all time. Okay, so aligned with X Lives and X Deaths, I wanted to put together a list of my and a bunch of the CBH writers' favorite Wolverine stories. So we've got a really cool curated list of like off the beaten path favorites. Okay, most of the stuff that are on these types of lists, your Old Man Logan, your Claremont and Miller Wolverine, most of those are not on there. Okay, so we got some really good, fun off the beaten path Wolverine Rex, which I super recommend. Again, you find all this on comicbookherald.com. I had to put my pick in at the end. I did have to put one traditional favorite at the end of that list because it is my favorite Wolverine comic of all time. It's one of my favorite Marvel comics of all time. It is Barry Windsor Smith's Weapon X, okay? It is issue 72 to 84 of Marvel Comics Presents. Came out in the early 1990s, and it is absolutely my favorite Wolverine story. And I talk a little bit in that write-up about why that is. I've thought about maybe I'll do a video, since that may or may not happen because I have so many other commitments going on right now. I will just say, the thing I love so much about Weapon X, the original Barry Windsor Smith comics, aside from the fact that he's one of the greats, one of the artistic storytelling greats, and that comic looks incredible, is there's so much mystery with Wolverine in that era, right? There's so much mystery about what is Weapon X? What did they do to him? Where does he come from? What are his origins? We didn't know any of this in the 80s and 90s, right? Growing up on X-Men the Animated Series, all that stuff was mystery. When X1 and X2, the movies are coming out with Hugh Jackman, we didn't know. So like when Wolverine goes back to Weapon X, that is all mystery. We didn't have what we have now as readers in a post-House of M world where Wolverine's memories were restored and he regained, a good chunk of like who he was. And when Wolverine Origins has been written, right, and we kind of know where he came from, the absence of that was actually far more thrilling. And the mystery about Wolverine and the unknowability of his past, which Barry Windsor Smith captures better than anyone. Like that whole comic is like, did this happen or didn't this happen? And ultimately you don't know, and ultimately it doesn't matter. It's still an incredible story. And the coolest thing about it is like, probably some of it did, but all of it could have. And it shapes Wolverine. It shapes our idea of him. It shapes who he is, and it shapes his relationship to Weapon X. That's my all-time favorite Wolverine comic. And I tell you that story to tell you this one, which is Percy shooting for the best Wolverine comic of all time. It's not. It's not that. It's not on the Barry Windsor Smith Weapon X level. It's not even on like, I don't know, like the Jason Aaron run level. It's I like Old Man Logan better for sure. So X Lives of Wolverine #1 for me was frustrating. It was a frustrating comic book. There's so much hype built into this event. Okay, and again, these comparisons, and some of this stuff is just right. It's press, it's publicity. You say these things and you tease out these connective tissues because you want people to buy the book. I get it. I understand that, right? So the hype machine obviously is going to elevate it to a level that is not achievable, but nonetheless, it is an actual event, right? It is an actual moment of 10 issues weekly. The only thing in the X line that has done this in the Hickman era is House of X and Powers of 10, right? Like, it is an event. So if you're going to declare it as such, I would hope it would launch with an issue that would really knock it out of the park, that would really throw some curveballs, that would really bring the heat, would bring the juice, and would do something exciting and interesting and different. And X Lives of Wolverine does not do that. It does not innovate. It does not invent. It's telling a story that feels, to me, fairly familiar. It's a great looking book. Joshua Cassara, Frank Martin, fantastic artistic pair. I love them together. Again, Benjamin Percy, extraordinarily competent. But when you're writing the event of the X-Men, and the thing too is, like, consider the context of where we are as X-Men comics readers and as comics fans, right? We are coming out of a very muddled, really stagnant reign of X, okay? There's a lot of reasons, there's a lot of rationale, there's a lot of change. But like coming into this year now, it's like, okay, now's the chance for us to push ahead, to do new stuff, to fill out these plans, to play with all of these building blocks that we've been setting up over time and hit the destiny of X running. And X Lives of Wolverine hits the ground, wounded. It hits the ground wounded. It's not hitting the ground running. It feels too safe, I will say. I can already hear in the comments of my Cracking Krakoa video, I can already envision the commenters, because people love to say this when I get down on something, when I get critical. They love to say, it's the first issue. What are you doing? You're overreacting to a first issue. And a lot of times I'm sympathetic to that, and sometimes it's true, and sometimes it's not. In this instance, though, X Lives of Wolverine #1 is not a first issue, okay? It is the first issue of this event, but it is the next issue of Benjamin Percy's 40-plus issue X-Force and Wolverine series, okay? And that's one of the things that was the most notable and maybe the most surprising to me, even though it shouldn't be at all. But like, this is just the next issue of Wolverine, X Lives of Wolverine. It's just the next issue in the series. This is absolutely just filling in and building off the building blocks specifically of X-Force and of Wolverine. There's nothing really referenced here from any of the other books, including the likes of Inferno. Now, I know that's going to come. And I have theories as to how it's going to come, okay? But for the meantime, it's like, well, if you haven't been around or into the Percy experience to this point on X-Force and Wolverine, X Lives of Wolverine isn't going to do anything to change that. So I think individuals who have been fans of those books to this point, who have stuck with them and been super into it, or at least invested, you should check out X Lives of Wolverine #1. Like, you're probably going to enjoy it if you've enjoyed the ride to this point. But if you haven't, and you checked out on X-Force and Wolverine, I can't imagine you're going to dig this book. Like, I can't imagine it at all. It is wholly a continuation of those stories. I mean, the threads that it's pulling on here, it's pulling on all the buildup of Omega Red as a villain, as being granted amnesty on Krakoa, as Wolverine not trusting that. That's played out in both X-Force and Wolverine. It's connecting to Mikhail Rasputin, brother of Colossus, as a villain, basically, of a mutant who does not want to live on Krakoa, is aligned with Mother Russia. Russia, geopolitically, is not aligned with Krakoa. They do not get along, to put it, politely. And Mikhail is making moves, right, for Russia, including, as we found out somewhat recently in the pages of X-Force, controlling Colossus's actions in some manner, right? He's got this individual known as the Chronicler. This is a mutant that Mikhail keeps, like, in a dark room, and the Chronicler can, like, write the future. He's basically a stand-in for every comic book writer, right? It's like he writes the future, and then that future happens. Okay, that is what becomes. And like, Colossus seems to be under this control. We don't really know the degree of it. We don't really know the depth of it beyond, like, what did we see? I mean, Colossus murdered his girlfriend, which seems mildly out of character for Piotr, right? And then in Inferno #2, we saw Colossus elected to the Quiet Council, which, in the context of Inferno, was pretty funny because it never came up again. It was a big stinger at the end of issue 2. Hey, Colossus is here. We show him looking a little menacing. Nothing happened with it in the actual Inferno event. It feels now probably like, well, that was all set up, okay, for what's going to happen in Inferno, which is my expectation here is in Death of Wolverine #1, we're going to get some Colossus content, because we have all these connections to what is going on with Russia, what is Mikhail's plans, how does it involve Omega Red. My theory, and I'll just throw it out here because it's going to be in my Kraken Krakoa video, I'll just say it. I think Mikhail's going to get word from Colossus through their control, and Colossus is now quiet council access about the Xavier, Moira, Magneto Trinity, that whole deal, or at least whatever bits of it Colossus is fed, right? He's going to get that information, and then based on that information, he's going to say, okay, we can't allow Krakoa to come to fruition. We need to use our time travel tech, which who does? If you're a nation and you don't have time travel tech, like, you're not a nation. You think you are, but really you're not. They're going to send, and then they send Omega Red back, right? And it's going to be this time war between Wolverine and Omega Red, saving the life of Professor X, which, like, hey, as somebody who, as I've said this many times, grew up on the 90s X-Men animated series, I've seen One Man's Worth. Like, I've seen it, and it's good. I like it. But protecting Professor X, going back and preventing his death, that story's been done. That story's been done a lot. It feels super familiar. So I'm a little skeptical of that. I'm seeing here in the comments, your expectations are high, Dave. Like, yeah. Yeah. My expectations for comic books that I'm going to spend money on and spend time reading and spend time talking about are high. Like, I keep them within reason, right? There are certain books and certain things that are just fun, right? That are just dumb fun, or even just like well executed escapes. Not everything needs like I'm reading Chris Ware's Building Stories right now. Okay, and if you're unfamiliar with Chris Ware, he's like this super inventive experimental graphic novelist. Does these incredibly critically acclaimed thing. Building Stories comes in a box. It looks like a game board, and it's got all sorts of different pieces, and it's super non-traditional. It's fascinating. I love it. I don't expect that out of a Wolverine comic. Okay, I'm prepping for an interview with Warwick Johnson Cadwell, or Cadwell Johnson, who has worked with Mike Mignola on these, Mignola verse. Mignola is the creator of Hellboy. These vampire hunters. Those stories are a blast. Those stories are a blast. They look great. Just vampire hunting stories. They're not super complex. They're not literary. They're not getting compared to James Joyce and all that. But they're good and they're fun and they're tight and they achieve the goals that they set for themselves very, very well. And I think, one approach to criticism is you say, did this piece of art meet the goals that it was trying to achieve? And I would say with Wolverine, with X Lives, the answer is no. Look at this through any perspective, right? Look at what perspectives can we bring to what someone might expect out of this comic? Well, how about it's introducing people to Wolverine? No, not good at that, right? It's really not. It's very referential based on Percy's previous X-Force and Wolverine runs. What about just telling the greatest Wolverine story of all time, the stated aim? Right now, no. Super familiar, super trite, very much a reflection of stories that have already been told. So it's like it doesn't feel like it's doing what it wants to be doing, and you can feel that while reading it, hence the criticism. And I think too, the reason my expectations are high with X-Men comics and why I come to this stuff the way that I do is the bar was below the ground before the House of X and Powers of 10, right? The bar was below the ground when we're talking about X-Men Blue and X-Men Gold and all that stuff, right? I was out. I was all the way out, with the exception of the occasional Generation X or X-Men Red or whatever, right? So I was out. And then House of X and Powers 10 raised the bar. It raised the bar with this incredible story, and I don't need everything to hit that bar, but I do want everything to try. I do want everything to try, because otherwise, why are we doing this? Why are we reading superhero comics? There are so many good comics we could be reading and spending our time. There's so much good media in the world. I mean, good grief. There are so many things that those of us privileged enough to sit and consume media can consume, that no, I don't want to waste my time on an average X Lives of Wolverine comic and say and sit here and pretend oh, well, it's okay and that's fine enough. It's not. And I think we as comic book fans and anyone in the field of criticism needs to hold these things to a higher standard. And I think X Lives of Wolverine is a letdown in that regard, and that's why I find it so frustrating. That's what I find frustrating about it. I didn't read this and I wasn't furious. I don't sit here and think these are bad comic book creators. They're all very good. I know that. And that's why I want more from it. So, and to put, a spin on it here, Death X Deaths of Wolverine could be great, could be awesome. I hope that it is, right? The cover teases the phalanx. Okay, the cover's teasing like future stuff, like Wolverine going to the phalanx. Maybe he's protecting Moira, maybe he's protecting Magneto. That'd be cool. Give me a twist, give me something different, and I'm in, right? And I'll be all the way back in. But for the time being, it's just like this book. It's exactly kind of what you thought it'd be, and that's disappointing. Because I want bigger and I want better, and I want to be surprised and I want to be excited about these comics, and I want them to be incredible. And when they're not, and again, the expectations of an event like this are that it should be incredible. And I mean, the closest comparison here, the closest comp is probably like Trial of Magneto, because that's a similar situation where Leah Williams was writing X Factor with David Baldeon. That series, they pitched doing this Trial of Magneto story, and then editorial was like, okay, that's not going to be X Factor. We're going to cancel X Factor. We're going to make that an event instead because that's going to sell better. That did not benefit the creative team of Trial of Magneto because it set the stage for this to be a big 5-issue maxi series event, and it wasn't that. It was in some ways a continuation of X Factor and the run that we had seen to that point. It was in some ways sort of a what do you call it? Scarlet Witch miniseries. Okay, and I don't necessarily think with X Lives and X Deaths that we're seeing a similar problem. Because I think everybody seems to be like clearly this was going to be an event, but the comic itself just reads like the next issue of Wolverine, and that is not what I hoped for from this. So it could have been a lot bigger and it could have been a lot better. Again, there's stuff I like. I think visually it's a very good comic. I think Kassar and Martin's talents are so great that they're a little wasted in this book. There's one really cool image of a cerebral helmet on Wolverine and visions of all his lives, and that's interesting. And that's probably, but it's like the only visual in the book that really captures kind of what they're capable of, I think. So, but I'm interested in hearing counterpoints. Obviously too, like, okay, yes, my expectations are high, and I think that X-Men comics, particularly launched as the big next X-Men event, should be big and good and exciting, and something new. But like for many of you, this may have been exactly that, right? And I get that, right? Like it's taste is subjective in some regards, even though mine is flawless, right? Like I understand that. So it's some of you are gonna be super into it. I want to hear why. I want to hear like what you're into about it. I just don't. My skepticism was not in any way counterbalanced by the content of this comic. And yeah, I think like it's Wolverine protecting a baby Charles Xavier, and now the end of the comic is him. Now we're going to go to another greatest hits era of Wolverine with Team X, which Percy has already explored a fair amount in his run. It's going to be Wolverine, Maverick, and Sabretooth. He's going to have to go to another location to save Professor X in a different era. It could get increasingly interesting, just that aspect of it. Seeing different stages of Professor X, that's actually pretty interesting. Because again, that's one of those things where we don't have a real tight connection of the Professor X as we know him now with the Moira influence and like comics history, right? So Wolverine finding Professor X when he's been under the influence of Moira, a DUM, right? He's made him dumb. He's going to be a different kind of character, or at least our understanding and our perception of him is potentially different than what it's been when we read those old X comics. So that piece of it, I can get excited about. I can get into that, but again, it's got to be executed the right way. So, but again, like I can hear it. I can hear the comments of it's only the first issue. And that drives me up a wall because it is so not. It is so not. It is literally the culmination of what? I mean, I can't do math, but 2+ years of story that Benjamin Percy's been telling. This is not the first issue. You don't have to wait and see. We know what this is, right? As Denny Green famously said, the Bears are who we thought they were. And Ben Percy's Wolverine is who we thought he was. And I hope to be totally wrong and totally baffled with X Deaths as it does something entirely new and hits a gear that I did not see coming and does all sorts of phalanxy sci-fi future timeline stuff. But I am not holding my breath. I remain skeptical. X Lives of Wolverine #1 did not do a heck of a lot to change that. I do like the dark sideification of Omega Red. Okay, putting his little Omega symbol on people's heads, like Final Crisis Dark Side, like that's kind of cool. I like the idea of Omega Red getting this time travel ability, getting this like Agent Smith Matrix ability to just inhabit whoever the heck is around. It makes Omega Red potentially scary and potentially, he's declaring himself Wolverine's new archenemy. And that's a title you got to earn. And I don't think Omega Red is there yet. I think, one thing that we kind of haven't gotten too much of, which is surprising given how much Omega Red content we've seen so far, is we don't know a lot about like who he is, what he's doing, why he does what he does. You know what I mean? There's not a ton of Omega backstory, so I think to make him like a super compelling arch enemy of Wolverine, we're definitely gonna need more of those scenes of him with Mikhail, of him with this, kind of Russian government as they're figuring out, how it sounds like from this issue they're splitting like, a human and mutant state almost with Mikhail and like it seems like Mikhail's kind of running the show at this point. But more Omega Red, right? Like if we're gonna do this, if we're really gonna try and declare him the villain, the arch enemy of Wolverine, he's supplanting Sabretooth and all that, then let's do it, right? Get into it. But we'll see. All right, get your questions in, get the chat in. I want to see them. That was a little hotter than I meant to go, but y'all got me started and I couldn't stop. Okay. So yeah, I mean, I think it was a disappointing debut issue. If you were here for X-Force and Wolverine, read it. You'll probably dig it. If you weren't, you may not. If you're not sure, then do you have to read X-Force and Wolverine to enjoy this? I mean, literally no. Like, you don't have to because, there's enough context clues, but like it references a fair amount of stuff. I really think you're gonna have a fuller appreciation, at least, for what's happening in this book if you're familiar with X-Force and Wolverine. But again, like that's 40 plus issues at this point, so that's a lot. That's a lot to go through. I don't understand if everybody doesn't want to do that. So all right, so that's enough on X Lives of Wolverine. If you have questions to it, I will definitely take them. But for the meantime, I will get to some super chat questions here. We have from Cole, Dave, are you ready for Oh Moira Red? For Oh Moira Red. Okay, that I was looking at that question and I was like, I don't know how I'm going to answer this because I do not understand what's happening here. But now that I say it out loud, I do. That would rule. That would roll. Yeah, okay. Like, yes, let's do more with Omega Red traveling through time, traveling through lifelines, and really messing with mutant history. I think that would be interesting, right? I think that's the thing is like, if this book can divvy up the threats, like I said, like if X Deaths is a future timeline where they're messing with Moira, or better yet, they're messing with Magneto, right? And we bounce different eras of Wolverine's history, and it's not all just Professor X stuff. Because I think part of my disillusion with the first issue is the old-timey Xavier's being born in the Xavier Mansion, the stillborn birth of Cassandra Nova as Professor Charlie is born. That just does not sound very exciting because it's this thing that we know to have happened, but and you have to start there, I guess. I understand you start with the birth, but it's also like, well, it's just like nobody wants to see a baby killed. like who are we kidding? Like, I don't understand why stories do this. Like, we don't want this to happen. Nobody wants to show it. They don't have the courage to show that, and good, they shouldn't. That's insane. Like, go to a timeline where Omega Red threatening Professor X is actually possibly going to happen, right? When that execution is plausible. Okay? I think like going to the literal birth of these characters is just like, we know how this ends. Like, of course Wolverine's going to stand there with Professor X in his arms. Like, there's nothing super interesting or exciting about that. Calling Omega Red Omara Red, I'm super into. And that's actually one piece that I'm probably the most interested in, which is, so in the credits page of X Lives and X Deaths, we see Wolverine, we see Logan 6, Logan VI, and we see Logan VII, Logan 7. And I'm interested, does that just mean Logan inhabiting 10 different eras of his lifespan? Or could that have anything to do with various Moira lifelines. I mean, it seems like, based on what's happened so far, is there's going to be 10 eras of Logan's history that he goes back to and inhabits, right? And apparently, I mean, the implication from the credits page is six, then, the one we actually saw here would be Logan when he's an adult and Professor X is being born, but he still has bone claws. He hasn't been through Weapon X. And then seven, maybe, is when he's with Team X, with the CIA. I don't know. There's a lot of stuff in between there, right? So I'm curious to see the different Logans, the different iterations. Like, what does that actually mean? What are the eras we're actually going to play with here? I do want to see that stuff playing out fully. So yeah, I'm ready for that. I'm excited for it. I hope it's good. New Type asks, with X-Men being big again, Ben being Spider-Man, spoilers for Spider-Man, Daredevil having a fresh era, it feels like we are in an era of 90s nostalgia. What are your thoughts? Oh yeah, 90s nostalgia is huge. I work in marketing. 90s nostalgia has been hot for a minute. I think we're probably more or less moving past 90s nostalgia at this point, and we are on to early 2000s nostalgia. If not a little further, okay? My wife just showed me today an announcement for something like a When We Were Young tour, and it's My Chemical Romance and Paramore. Those are bands that I grew up with. So like, who is actually old now is people that still think they're young, namely myself, namely millennials. Okay, millennials are old as hell, right? That gets misconstrued all the time. So I think, like, yes, in comics terms, there's been a huge wave of 90s nostalgia. Shouts to Donny Cates, shouts to Steve Orlando, some of the shouts to James Tynion, right? Some of these creators who grew up on some of these 90s comics and have a lot of affinity for it have brought these things back in a big way. But I actually think we're probably even more so getting ready to progress to more like 2000s nostalgia. Yeah, and I don't actually know with Daredevil, like what's going on in Devil's Reign, and we'll talk about that. That's a good transition because we'll talk about Devil's Reign here with X-Men. I actually don't think what's happening in Daredevil is particularly reminiscent of the 90s, because the 90s are kind of a dark age for Daredevil. Like once 1986 is Daredevil Born Again, and then you get the Anna Senti and JRJR run, but then it's like, then you get the DG Chichester, Worcestershire run, and that goes for a while, and that's pretty hit or miss for a lot of folks. And then Daredevil runs around as like a French agent of Shield for a minute. Like there's some weird 90s stuff. So no, I would not hold up the 90s as a source of tremendous Daredevil success. But yeah, what's happening in Spider-Man is definitely, anytime you're referencing the Clone Saga, that is about that embodies the 90s just as distinctly as really anything going on. All right, so one more super chat, and then we'll move on to Devil's Reign X-Men because there's an interesting comic book. Rodrigo asks, the Five is basically the most important resource of Krakoa, and you can literally attack one from behind without Black Tom, Sage, or Krakoa noticing. That's a good point. That's a good point. I have called out Krakoan security like since X-Force #1. It's funny, like as much time as Percy and X-Force and other comics too have spent on like X-Force and the actual like ops of protecting Krakoa, they get raided and they have all these holes, and they're just horribly prepared for like everything. like they're badly prepared for basically everything. I mean, even in like Trial of Magneto, you have those scenes where they're walking the Avengers through the hatchery, but they don't want the Avengers to know about Resurrection. And it's like, what are you doing? Like, this stuff's just out in the open. It doesn't make any sense if you're actually trying to conceal those things. And in some ways, it frustrates me because I like the idea of Professor X and Moira and Magneto having this thing on lockdown, right? About knowing how to build a Krakoa that could last because they have all the information in Moira's lives. But if you take it the other way and you just look at like, well, they're trying to build a new nation and none of them have done that before, it's pretty believable. It's pretty plausible that they kind of wouldn't know what they're doing. But yeah, like Omega Red, like, and this is, I'm trying to think like where else we just saw this. I mean, I feel like we've seen this a bunch lately where people just walk in the hatchery on the Five and just like have their way with it. And it's like, yeah, like wouldn't that be the one, I don't know, like one of two, like that and Cerebro helmets should be the most protected spaces in Krakoa. and it's like there's not even like a key card. You just walk in. I agree. That does not make a lot of sense. But shouts to Gold Balls for getting a moment in the sun, getting attacked by Omega Red. So, all right, let's talk about some of the other comics that came up today. But again, if you have questions about things that we've already talked about, get them in. Marauders number 27 ending. Let's start there, actually. So, Marauders number 27 came out last week, and it was not tremendously exciting. I think Jerry Duggan has so tremendously faded out on Marauders. Like that started out, I started so hot on Marauders. I was really into it. I loved it. I thought it was the best X book, and then just like nothing happened forever. Really, ever since the Kate stuff, like once Kate got resurrected, it was like this book's over. But anyway, issue 27 came out. Miraculously, 27 issues, and at the very end of the comic, there was the one interesting page in there, which was Kate Pryde. She still can't go through the Krakoan gates. Right? This mystery of why she can't do it. It's like nobody can quite figure it out. Forge hasn't cracked it, yada yada. She goes to Reed Richards. She goes to Reed Richards, the Fantastic Four. Remember, Kate is friendly with Franklin Richards. They have a pretty good relationship dating back to the original X-Men Fantastic Four miniseries from the 80s. And, Kate goes to Reed and says, hey, I could use your help getting through these gates. Reed counters with, well, if I'm going to help you with that convenient access problem, then you need to help me restore the memory that Professor X viciously stole from me so I could cure mutants. Those two things do not feel of an equitable nature to my mind, right? Those two requests feel very, very different to me, but Kate is like, yeah, sure, cool. So we could do that. Now, what Reed is referencing, if you've forgotten, is in the X-Men Fantastic Four miniseries written by Chip Zdarsky. I think it had art by the Dodsons. In the beginning of that, we learned that Reed created basically like a mutant Dappmenter that you can put on his son's genes, in this case Franklin Richards, so that Franklin couldn't access the Krakoan gates. And Professor X and Magneto are not happy to learn that Reed invented that because it could be used as a cure. Moira might want to take note of that one. And they go and they pretty viciously and savagely take it from Reed's memory, but leave him with the memory that they did this. Like, he knows that information's gone. Now, so there's honestly a lot of really interesting questions, a lot of really interesting ways that can go in terms of, like, what's the story to come next. My biggest question is probably, like, why does Reed want that so badly? And it could just be, like, make me whole kind of thing, right? It could, knowing Reed, it could be his twisted way of, like, hey, if I have that information, I can actually help Franklin now, because he's despondent that he was declared mutant no more, right? No more mutant for Franklin, in the Dan Slott Fantastic Four. But it's also like, I don't have any reason to believe Reed like actually wants to cure mutant kind. Like, that doesn't seem like his MO. So what exactly is his rationale? That'd be interesting, right? Like that's an interesting story to be told. Kate being game for that, like just so she can use the gates, doesn't make a lot of sense still to me. But that's happening. So it's interesting. It's interesting. I want to see more stuff with that Fantastic Four plot element for sure be picked up here in the future. I don't know exactly how or where it might, but there's some good stuff there. There's also some good teases that we left off in that miniseries with Doctor Doom, right? And sort of his stuff with Valeria and what they're planning for, and how Krakoa threatens them. And, I if anyone's going to pick it up, I want it to be Al Ewing, because he did a good job with Doom in not X-Men Red and Sword, so we'll see. Like that could be interesting, but there's a lot going on there. So I liked that. Things I liked. I also liked Devil's Reign X-Men today. Jerry Duggan and Phil Noto. It's a tie-in series. It's simple. It's pretty straightforward. But basically, it just connects the dots between, okay, as Devil's Reign is going on, what does that mean for the X-Men? Now, Devil's Reign, for those of you who don't know, it's the Marvel event going on right now. It spins out of the Chip Zdarsky, mostly Marco Cicchetto, Daredevil run. It's the two of them doing this event. The event is basically, so Wilson Fisk, the Kingpin, has been mayor of New York since like 2016, 2017. It stems back to the Charles Soule run. And he's still mayor, and he's now declaring finally that vigilantism is outlawed. Okay, so it's like kind of like a mini Civil War, kind of premise, but it's kingpins, and he's trying to outlaw vigilantes in the state of New York. He's also, or in New York City, he is also, he put together like his own Thunderbolts, so his like new kind of Suicide Squad. He's got like US Agent, he's got Rhino, he's got Electro, Taskmaster. There was a miniseries in King in Black that kind of put this team together for the first time, although the team's a little bit different here. So basically what happens here is he sends US Agent, he sends the the Thunderbolts to go and kick the X-Men out of their tree in Seneca Park in New York because he doesn't want the vigilantes there. As that's happening, Emma Frost gets involved, and they now they're playing politics. You got Kingpin and Emma doing their own mini succession thing, and Emma shifts her weight on the political scene using Harry Leland at the United Nations. They get the Seneca Tree X-Men home declared like a, I don't know what the term is, some sort of embassy thing that can't be kicked out, basically. So Emma wins this round. We also are getting some interesting flashbacks here in terms of the relationship between Kingpin and Emma Frost back when Emma was like full-on villain in the Hellfire Club. That stuff's actually pretty cool and pretty interesting to me because we're kind of seeing like, okay, Kingpin had connections with Emma and he would reach out to her when he needed things done, and Emma went to Kingpin to protect Lord Chantel. We saw in some previous Marauders issues. So I'm interested in what's going on there. It's also like it's a sensible tie-in for what is happening in Devil's Reign. It makes sense. I mean, the other piece that happens in this issue is they really spell out exactly what is happening with Cyclops. So like he cannot be visible in the public eye because of the fact that his resurrection was like more or less revealed to Ben Urich. So he is obviously, as we saw in X-Men #6, going as Captain Krakoa, which is goofy and silly, and I love that he hates it. So I'm actually pretty here for the Captain Krakoa era. But that's all there. The other tie-in today was Death of Doctor Strange, Black Knight, and X-Men. This is basically a continuation of the Cy Spurrier written Black Knight miniseries, which came out last year. If you haven't read that, I think this one might be a pretty cold splash of water to the face. It's a pretty fun miniseries. If you like Cy Spurrier and you like his writing, I would recommend checking it out. He actually makes Dane Whitman Black Knight kind of interesting, which is not something I've ever felt in my life. So that continues here. You have Dane and his kind of newfound daughter. They go and they have to do some magic stuff with Phaesa, aka Excalibur. Forgetting her last name, but she stems from the Captain Britain and MI13 run, which was written by Paul Cornell in the 2000s, circa the Secret Invasion and Dark Reign era of Marvel Comics. And those are really good. Those are super underrated comic books, Captain Britain and MI13. But that character's cool. So they team up. They help the X-Men. The X-Men are turned into literal demons here, including Jean, who's turned into like a very large Gene demon. And they battle them, and they are saved, of course. The tease at the end of this, and it's a spoiler for the issue, I suppose, though I can't imagine most people would be upset about this, is it turns out Dane's daughter is a mutant, and she doesn't realize it yet. So that is a possible Black Knight connection that I expect we'll see Cy Spurrier bring into Legion of X or some future X works. I would be surprised if they do not. Seeing the comment here, would love for Dane Whitman et al. To join Knights of X. Yeah, that would make a ton of sense, right? And we get a little bit of Otherworld crossover here because we're talking about, we're with Dane, you got the King Arthur stuff. You got these famous swords. You got Merlin, right? And that's going to bring us into Otherworld. So that's a crossover that definitely would make sense. I would definitely not be opposed. I think it makes a lot of sense and could play pretty well. But all right, so like that's all the comics that came out today, and all the main stuff I want to talk about. Again, I'm gonna have a crack in Krakoa up on X Lives of Wolverine. I'm gonna say what I said here, but more eloquently and more thoughtfully, hopefully. But that should be going up tonight. I think it's already uploaded probably. But otherwise, get in some questions, get in some thoughts, get in some topics. Otherwise, we can call it. Seeing Jean looks like Blob. That she does. That she does, though still killing the miniskirt. Let's see. All right. So, not seeing any major questions. Yeah, I mean, I think for me it was actually like a decent day of X-Men comics, because the tie-ins were pretty solid. Devil's Reign X-Men I think will continue to be interesting, and then Lives of Wolverine. Like, there's a lot to say about it. Again, like it's not an uninteresting comic. There's a lot to talk about, and that is valued, certainly. I just don't think it lives up to its event status or anything like that. But it's yeah, I got to check out She-Hulk. I haven't read anything else. I only read the X stuff so far. Got to check out Eternals. I got to check out new She-Hulk. I got to see what's going on. in the Marvel sphere. I'm seeing what are your favorite Marvel books right now. You know, honestly, like it's so like when you run a website and Comic Book Herald stuff, like there's so much time that I put into getting the best of 2021 stuff done that I tend to fall behind on stuff that comes out later in the year. And now in the early parts of the year, you know, now I have to catch up on like, okay, like new Venom just came out, you know, like I haven't hardly read any of that. The one book that I am caught up on is Moon Knight, which is a little more recent. I think its seventh issue came out today. Moon Knight, written by Jed McKay and art by Alessandro Cappuccio. That's been really good, really really good. Moon Knight had a new trailer this week. You know, probably all you saw. It was awesome. Super excited about it now. I very very excited for Moon Knight on Disney Plus. But you know, as that comes out, then there's a ton of hype, right? I see like the traffic for my Moon Knight reading order shoots through the roof. You know, which is great. Just updated it. That's awesome. But you know, I start wanting to recommend. Okay, what Moon Knight comics should people read? And there's you know the McKay and Cappuccio run is quickly entering the conversation of some of my faves for sure, right? Like it's very quickly getting that potential. I think Jeff Lemire and Greg Smallwood run from I think it started in 2016. That's definitely going to be the go-to that you're hearing a lot. Probably already heard a lot. That seems like the one that the show is most clearly going to be based on, which is basically like you know, it's a little memento-y. There's probably a better example, but basically it's like, you know, Moon Knight in an asylum, and it's like what is real, what is not. You know, kind of taps into what I said at the start of this issue about why I like Barry Windsor Smith's Weapon X so much, where it's like that state of unreality, that state of not knowing exactly what's playing out here. It does it super well. So definitely read the Lemire and Smallwood run. I'm going to reread that in the nearest future if I can carve out time, because I think that'll be super fun. I've been loving Eternals. I'm still all in on Gillen and Ribbage on Eternals for as long as they're going to do it. I'm even excited for this Judgment Day arc. That's going to be like an Avengers and X-Men versus Eternals kind of thing. Bringing some Celestials into the game. Like I'm excited for it. If Gillen's at the helm, I trust him. The series has been really good, and I'm actually looking forward to that event. I do like the Zdarsky and Chiquetto Daredevil is great. Like it's flipping great, and Devil's Reign has been solid. Which you know Marvel events they can go one of two ways, essentially. Oh, that's not right. And Daredevil, you know, Devil's Reign is actually a pretty good Marvel event so far. Only a couple issues out, so there's a lot more to go. So again, I got to catch up on everything else that's going on in Marvel and across the board to figure out what my favorites of the year are going to be. But I would say those up front have been good. Let's see what else we got. Do you have any thoughts on the Marvel Unlimited X-Men comics? Oh, that does remind me something that I haven't talked about. So there's two things. One, X Lives of Wolverine #1 is free on Marvel Limited today. I don't know if it's going to stay that way like forever and ever. But you know, day of release that was up on Marvel Limited, which is a really cool move. I wish I'd known that before I threw down $6 on Comixology. Like, really wish I'd realized that, but I didn't. But if you haven't read it yet, that's an easy way to check it out, right? So no harm done if you already have a Marvel Unlimited subscription, which I don't know why you wouldn't if you're a Marvel fan. And they also have an Infinity comic on there called Life of Wolverine, okay, which is a tie-in Infinity comic. Their Infinity stuff is just like the vertical scroller webtoon style thing. It's a simple, just like chronological order history of Wolverine. So it's like the premise is, and it connects, like it's a tie-in to X Lives. The premise is Jean Grey is going through Wolverine's history and his psyche, and she has to kind of go back through his history beat by beat in order, which is not how it's been displayed throughout, you know, comics history, right? Like it has been totally helter-skelter all over the place. You know, we don't learn his origin until 2001, even though the character was introduced in 1975, all that stuff. But it's simple and straightforward, and if you don't know that stuff, or you just want that little time with X Lives, I love that they're doing that. Like strategically, I love that Life of Wolverine exists. That's really cool. Do an Infinity comic that ties into your big event comic of the week. Push people to Marvel Unlimited. It's smart. It's good. That's awesome. Otherwise, I'm really not reading a heck of a lot of the Infinity comics. I fell behind on X-Men Green sometime around the time Nature Girl killed like her third person and like nothing happened. That story was wild. I'll go back and finish it at some point. But otherwise, yeah, I mean, I'm not like seeking out these Infinity comics, but I like that they exist. I like strategically they're gonna be doing more stuff with them. So it's yeah, there's some interesting stuff that can be done there. Let's see, what do we got? Just quick show of support in the super chat. Thank you for that. Very much appreciate it. Moon Knight has been alarmingly good. Totally agree. Totally agree. Do you expect an Eternals, Immortal, X-Men, X-Over? Yeah, I do. It would be surprising if that didn't happen. It'll be interesting to see, like, okay, is Judgment Day going to bring that into play, or is that purely going to be Avengers versus X-Men type stuff, or excuse me, Avengers versus Eternal stuff? I mean, it seems like with Eternals, if Gillen is going to tap into like future timelines and the true meaning of immortal X-Men here, the Eternals are the types of characters who would still be around to be interacting. So I would love to see the Eternals and the Immortal X-Men interact in some future timelines and some possibilities about where Mutant Kind of Krakoa is going. That would be super up my alley. Let's see. We got Cassandra Nova in Marauders? Question mark. Yeah, that has been teased. There's a cover with Cassandra Nova going to be in Marauders. I may have talked about this last time. I don't remember. I've been craving some Cassandra Nova content for a while. I trust Steve Orlando. I like Steve Orlando as a writer. I hope he can integrate Cassandra Nova into this team. It's going to be a super weird and super interesting one. I hope, again, it's kind of that thing of I expect they're going to lighten Nova. I expect they're going to lighten her as if the menacing villainous presence she's been, dating back to Morrison and quietly on New X-Men. But I hope they don't make her a joke. And I don't often have a problem with that. I see MCU fans or whatever critics sometimes say like, "Oh, Thor and Ragnarok made Thor a joke," and people don't like it for that reason. I've got no problem with that, right? Like, Thor Ragnarok's a super funny, enjoyable movie, and I would rather have that and be able to make fun of things like Thor and Surtur. I got no problem with that. With Cassandra Nova, that I don't know. I don't see that working super well. But we'll see. We'll see what they do. All right. Let's see. Final comments. Any final questions? Are we going to see mutants and Inhumans together? Listen. I'm like as big an Inhumans fan as anyone I know. Okay, literally no one has done more for Paul Jenkins and Jai Lee Inhumans miniseries than I have. I'm just going to claim that credit right now. No one has done more promoting that book than me putting it at the start of my modern Marvel reading order on Comic Book Herald. I guarantee you I have moved more units of Jenkins and Lee's Inhumans than anyone on this planet. That said, I don't know why everybody's like so worried and interested in where the Inhumans are going to show up. Like, they'll show up when they're ready. They'll show up when there's an idea. I saw some people saying like, "Oh, Hickman's okay. He's doing this Moon Knight anthology book and with Chris Patello, and that'll be a fine short story, I'm sure." Then people are like, "Oh, is he going to do an Inhumans run?" And it's like, you have any idea how weird it would be if Jonathan Hickman stepped in and he's like, "Hey, I'm doing Inhumans next after X-Men, after they were the villains of mutant kind for years, both metatextually and textually." It would be so bizarre. It'd be so bizarre. I just don't see it. I don't see it happening. I don't think we'll see the mutants and Inhumans together anytime soon. I truly do not. All right, let's see. Final questions. I'm seeing some talk about X-Men 92. Going to be launching as a comic relaunch with doing House of X, right? So it's going to be what if House of X was in the X-Men 92 animated verse, but this is a comic. I think that's super fun. I think it's a blast as an idea. I like Steve Fox as a writer a lot. I've had him on the show. I've talked to him about a bunch of his work. Like, he's a super interesting dude, right? He wrote comics characters for a while for Paste. He's editing Department of Truth right now, which was like my favorite indie comic of last year. He's a great writer in his own right. He did this erotic fiction book called Cheater Code, which is great. But yeah, I mean, he's a huge X fan, so I expect that book's gonna be really fun. Doing House of X and animated X-Men 92 style. Yeah, that's like the only way you could get me to read an X-Men 92 animated comic. I would say is specifically, hey, what if we did House of X? I'm here for it. All right, final question. What X books are you still looking forward to reading, if any? Hellions is ending, right? Yeah, so Hellions is done. It ended with issue 18. Zeb Wells is going to be taken over as the writer of Amazing Spider-Man with art by John Romita Jr. Shouts to John Romita Jr., young gun stepping in. And good for Zeb, right? Good for Zeb. Like, take on Amazing. I hope he does a great job. I hope that rules. But pretty clearly not going to be writing X stuff while he's doing that, or at least that's the implication. So yeah, Hellions is done. What books am I excited for? I'm excited for all like the new stuff, right? I'm excited for like the new writers, the new creatives, and kind of the new books. I'm excited for Al Ewing to the one that I'm most excited for, like a continuation of, is Al Ewing on X-Men Red, which is really just Sword 2.0, or at least it seems that way. Super excited for Karen Gillan on Immortal X-Men. I'm super excited for Victor Laval touching Sabretooth and phrase that poorly, but writing Sabretooth and whatever his triptych is going to be. Alyssa Wong was named in a as an upcoming creator in one of those Adventures in Poor Taste X-Men Mondays, and we don't know what she's going to be writing yet, but I read some of hers, Dr. Aphra. I think she has a good feel for snappy dialogue and language, so I'm excited to see what potentially come out of that. Um, what else? What else? What else? I mean, those are probably the big ones that I'm most excited about right now. And there might be something I'm forgetting, but those are the books that I'm excited about. The rest feels like, let's see, Legion of X, I would have been more excited about uh, early in Way of X, more so than I am now. But that's definitely a book I'm going to want to read for sure. Where is Lee Williams writing? Good question. I don't know. I don't know what the heck's going on there. Honestly, there don't seem like any books that are available. Uh, yeah, but those are the books that listen. I see questioning touching Sabretooth in the chat. I phrased it poorly. I phrased it poorly. He has been in the hole for a long time. Who knows what happens down there? We don't know. We're gonna see. Right? We're all gonna find out together, as a team, as pals. So, all right. Thanks everybody for listening. This has been a blast. If you like Comic Book Herald, please like, subscribe, channel, comment here. That all helps me out a great deal. I will be back next week doing X Deaths for sure, and then based on that, we'll see. We'll see if I want to continue doing it weekly. So Casual Krakoa will continue to return. Check out all the good writing we got going up on comicbookherald.com. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Comic Book Herald if you want to talk comics some more. Thanks so much, everybody, for coming in and chatting live and being here with me. It's super fun. It makes this very worthwhile to do. So I appreciate it. And you get to see my Secret Wars wall, right? You get to see the wall of Secret Wars that I finally got a situation where I can stand in front of that and my Stiltman figure and show it off. So that's exciting, right? I feel good about it. So all right, thanks everybody for coming, and as always, enjoy the comics.